The city woke to the clatter of early buses and the shy glow of a sun that had not yet decided if it would stay. A small restaurant on the corner of Juniper and 3rd pulled its metal shutters halfway and let in a ribbon of pale light. Inside, the stillness smelled of brewed coffee, lemon cleaner, and yesterday's hope. The floor was a checkerboard of old tile. The counter was nicked by years of elbows and keys, and the framed photographs along the wall told a quiet story of first paychecks and 50th anniversaries. In this place, ordinary people celebrated small victories. In this place, the day began before most hearts were ready. She arrived early, as she always did, when the stakes felt heavier than her breathing allowed. Her name was ASHA, and the city had never bothered to learn how to hold that name gently. She carried a second-hand purse that held a folded resume, a worn-handled pen, and a scrap of paper where she had written down phrases she had practiced the night before. Her English had edges, the kind that catch on impatience, the kind that invite smirks from people who never had to ask their mouths to learn new roots. But she had a steadfastness that did not announce itself, a quiet determination that lived in the way she straightened placemats and aligned, cutlery like a promise to the world that she could be counted on. The restaurant's owner had told her to start today. The morning shift, easy pace, friendly regulars, a chance to learn the register and the rhythm. She had slept only in fragments, editing her accent in her dreams, smoothing vowels that refused to listen, trading her mother tongue's music for the neat, clipped syllables of a language that seemed to prefer speed over tenderness. She had awakened with a prayer that contained more gratitude than requests and set out walking. Shoes, tapping a path she was determined to make her own. The manager arrived 3 minutes after her, keys jingling, confidence carried like a badge pinned too high. His name was Cole, the kind of name that turned into a signature on reprimands and schedules. He was built from tidy spreadsheets and a belief that efficiency should come dressed as superiority. He had learned the business in numbers more than in faces, and he wore power the way some were Kalantu strong, meant to announce itself before anything else could. He took one look at Usha's careful posture, the neatly braided hair, the shoes polished to a small halo, and he saw not a person, but a potential inconvenience. An accent would slow orders. A different rhythm would slow turnover. Compassion, he had decided, somewhere along the way, was bad for margins. He handed her an apron with the firm air of a man who believed he was giving someone far more than they deserved. She tied the strings with fingers that did not tremble, because she had learned that trembling made people want to prove they were right about you. He showed her the floor plan, the table numbers, the simple workstation by the register. He explained the specials without looking at her, as though the words should find their own way into her understanding, as though the responsibility for his clarity belonged to the listener alone. When he asked her to repeat the name of a dish, she did so with a vowel shaped by another life, and he pinched his lips in a way that drew invisible cameras to the moment. He did this often, this curating of small nations as if collecting them might count as leadership. The first regulars arrived with the clink of the bell. They belonged to this corner of the world, the way ivy belongs to a brick wall, rooted, woven, resilient. Asha greeted them with a careful warmth that did not assume familiarity, but promised it could grow. She noted coffee preferences, the way one woman always set her purse on the chair to her left, the way a man in a navy jacket tapped his spoon twice before tasting anything. She placed cups on saucers with a tenderness that made the porcelain feel lucky. She repeated orders into the small screen by the kitchen window, shaping each consonant with respect for the process, and an awareness that she was being measured in a language not her own. Cole watched from the counter, arms folded, a smirk squeezed into the corner of his mouth like a secret he was eager to share with anyone who would listen. When a customer asked for a substitution, Asha leaned toward clarity, repeating the options as she understood them, checking the menu notes she had written by hand. She moved slower than the more seasoned waitstaff, but there was no chaos in her pace, only a method that prioritized dignity over speed. For some, this would have been a relief, a rare chance to feel like a person instead of a transaction. For Cole, it was evidence to be filed under reasons to demand more. By mid-morning, the restaurant had swelled with chatter. The bell rang often, fragile and persistent, announcing breakfasts that turned into late mornings, coffees that turned into confessions. Bouchard's accent, if it could be called that, was simply the sound of someone building a bridge with new materials. Yet bridges terrify those who don't remember that their own voices once needed scaffolding. A group of office workers came in, laughing and checking their watches. The ritual of being busy performed with more conviction than joy. Asha seated them, poured water carefully, and asked for their order with a politeness that held room for each person. She repeated their selections and in the middle of a familiar sentence. Her tongue searched for a word that curled away from her like foil in a breeze. It was a small hitch, a moment to breathe and let the right syllable fall into place. But Cole stepped forward, as if summoned by the opportunity to prove his own fluency. He corrected her rhythm with exaggerated slowness, with a theatrical enunciation that turned language into a weapon. The office workers grew quiet, some of them pretending not to notice, others looking down to avoid complicity, which is its own form of complicity. Asha nodded, accepting the correction without letting it hollow her out. Because she had learned long ago that pride protected the wrong things when it bristled in public. She finished the order with humility that did not surrender her dignity, and returned to the counter for the tray. The kitchen passed plates through the window, heat rising like a blessing. Asha balanced the tray, arms steady, and moved through the room with the care of someone delivering more than food. She set each dish down with a quiet grace that made even the office workers look up and soften. For a moment, the room belonged to kindness. For a moment, the correction had no power. But Cole was not finished with his lesson in how authority can become a habit that mistakes itself for necessity. At the register, where receipts curled like sleeping cats, he called her over and pointed to a miskeyed item. It was small, a 10-cent error, the kind that is corrected with a shrug and a smile, in places where people are valued more than precision. He did not shrug. He did not smile. He tapped the screen with the impatience of a ruler. He spoke in a tone that suggested the earth had been disturbed by her presence, that she had introduced chaos into a system that had only known order before today. The shift supervisor, a woman with kind eyes who had learned to tuck her empathy into pockets and bring it out only when safe, watched with the weary knowledge that some days justice does not fit into a lunch break. Asha apologized and corrected the item, then stepped back to make room for the next customer. She felt the heat that comes to the face when someone has thrown their voice at you like a stone. She took a breath and counted the seconds on the wall clock, not to pass time, but to make it her ally. It struck her that the world often measures a person by the sounds they cannot make yet. She wondered how long it would take before her vowels stopped being a map of where she had come from and started being a bridge to where she was going. During the midday lull, when plates stacked into neat towers and the espresso machine exhaled like a tired athlete, Asha wiped down tables with the devotion of someone who knows that small tasks repair large sorrows. She found a child's glove under a chair and set it on the host stand, the fingers pointing toward a reunion. She straightened chairs, resetting the room's expectations. She did not ask for ease. She asked for a fair chance to learn without being turned into a spectacle. Cole circled. He liked the sound of his own footsteps on tile. He liked the reflection of his authority in the chrome of the coffee machine. He paused by the owner's office door, which remained closed during the morning, but seemed to give the entire restaurant its sense of rightness. The owner was rarely present at this hour. Paperwork, suppliers, and the kind of phone calls that shaped the week kept him away. Cole often took those hours as permission to consider himself the highest court of appeal. He ran his finger along the counter and snapped at a smudge as if it were an affront to civilization. He returned to Asha with a list of reminders, delivered like citations. He did not ask where she had learned to work this hard. He did not learn the sound of her name. By late afternoon, the tables shifted from hurried lunches to longer, slower stays. A pair of elderly friends shared a slice of pie and let the minutes stand still. A young couple split a soup and a secret. Asha refilled waters and noticed the details that are the true currency of service. A hand that shakes slightly, a glance that stays too long at the door, a napkin folded with care. She discovered she had a talent for anticipating need, for placing a saucer where a spoon would soon look for a place to rest, for bringing extra sugar before the question formed. This kind of intelligence does not appear on resumes. It is the kind that holds communities together. Near closing, the door opened with the particular reluctance of winter evenings. Though the calendar insisted it was still warm outside, a figure stepped in quietly, carrying with him a presence that made the bell's chime sound respectful. He was unassuming, dressed not in displays of wealth, but in simplicity that comes only to those who could choose otherwise. He stood for a moment, taking in the room, the counter, the staff. His eyes found Usha's careful hands, and the way she held a carafe, like a promise. He took a seat by the window, as if he had sat there often in another life. Cole noticed and straightened, assuming the posture he kept reserved for those who might hold the keys to his next promotion. He lifted his chin, smoothed his tie, and prepared the performance of leadership he believed everyone wanted to watch. He did not yet know that the room and the day were about to remeasure him. He did not yet know that the weight of words has a way of returning to the speaker. Asha approached the table with her practiced grace, aware of the man's quiet attention, but not unsettled by it. She offered a menu, with gratitude folded into the gesture. The man accepted it with a nod that carried recognition, as if the world had just presented him with a piece of a puzzle he had not expected to find today. The air changed, the way air changes right before rain. Somewhere, a clock clicked 1 second louder, and the glass along the window held the fading sky like a kept secret. The register hummed, the kitchen clattered, the evening stacked itself in gentle layers. Cole hovered, searching for a reason to intervene, to demonstrate the importance of being necessary. He watched Usha's mouth shape a word that, as always, carried traces of home. He prepared his correction, the routine that had made him feel essential all day. And then, the office door stubbornly quiet, all morning clicked open. A leather sole-touched tile, a presence, stepped into the room that recalibrated every conversation, every assumption, every unkindness, disguised as efficiency. Without a sound, the restaurant turned toward the doorway, the way flowers turn to light. The natural order of the place, long held together by patience and habit, sensed a change coming like a tide. The owner had arrived. The owner's footsteps were gentle, not because he lacked authority, but because he carried it differently than most. His name was Daniel, though everyone in the neighborhood simply called him Mr. Hale. He was a man who believed that the real shape of a business was drawn not in ledgers or profit margins, but in the faces of the people who walked out its doors. He dressed in simplicity and listened more than he spoke, which made people underestimate him if they were only looking for grandeur. But the walls of the restaurant remembered the days when he carried crates, scrubbed floors, washed dishes, and served tables before he could even afford a sign for the window. When Mr. Hale entered the room, Cole straightened his posture as if to claim ownership over the well-run dining floor before him. He offered a greeting, glazed with practiced charm, the kind of politeness that has been shaped for performance rather than sincerity. He hoped the owner would see him in motion, see the efficiency, the order, the clean tables, the steady flow of customers. He assumed these things were proof of his leadership. He did not see the traces of humiliation still lingering in the air, the kind that sits in silence behind someone's ribs, long after the moment passes. Asha stepped back slightly, not out of fear, but out of respectful acknowledgement. She had been taught that authority should not be crowded, yet the owner's eyes drifted toward her in a way that suggested familiarity, not recognition of identity, but recognition of essence. The way she moved, the way she carried stillness, the way some people, even in silence, reveal the quality of their heart. Mr. Hale walked past Cole's poised stance and addressed the kitchen staff with warmth, asking about deliveries, shifts, and family members who had recently been sick. He said little, but each word had weight. The atmosphere changed. The clatter of plates softened. The restaurant breathed differently. Cole watched, waiting for the moment when he would be acknowledged as the anchor of operations. It did not come. Instead, Mr. Hale took a quiet seat near the window, the same table where he had observed the room moments before. Not as an owner, but as a witness. ASHIR continued working, placing refills, gathering plates, wiping surfaces with a calm so steady that it made noise seem unnecessary. She didn't rush. She didn't panic. She didn't brace herself against the eyes of the others. She worked the way someone works, when they believe dignity is not something that can be taken, only surrendered. Cole finally approached, placing himself beside the owner, prepared to offer his well-rehearsed report of shift performance. He began with praises directed at his own efficiency. He described improvements he had made, staff he had whipped into shape, methods he had implemented to maximize output. His words were shaped like accomplishments, but they landed in the room like cold drafts. The owner listened, expression unreadable. When Cole attempted to mention the new girl and her performance issues, his voice dipped pointedly, expecting approval, but the owner did not respond. He only looked at the plates, the tables, the room, and then at the people. Cole misread the silence as encouragement and continued, detailing ASHIR's accent problems and lack of speed. Each word came with the assumption that these flaws were shared truths. ASHIR heard every word, though her face revealed none of the pain it carried. She kept her hands steady. She kept her breath slow. She had learned that survival sometimes meant showing the world only the surface of one's strength. The shift eventually ended, but not the day. Staff clocked out one by one, carrying the stories of the day like invisible bundles over their shoulders. The restaurant emptied slowly, the way sunsets stretch into twilight before allowing darkness to arrive. Only 4 people remained, the cook closing the kitchen, ASHIR cleaning the tables, the owner making silent notes in his mind, and Cole, who believed the night would confirm his authority. Mr. Hale finally spoke, his voice smooth with the calm of someone who rarely needed to raise it to be heard. He asked how ASHIR was adjusting, not as a test, as a human inquiry. She responded softly, with gratitude woven through every sentence. Her accent colored each word with sincerity that no correction could improve. Cole stood beside her, arms crossed, impatience simmering beneath the surface. He interjected sharply, explaining that she was still struggling, and that he had already begun correcting her speech and service technique. He spoke as though she were not standing there, as though she were an object to be discussed rather than a soul to be acknowledged. The owner's eyes lifted slowly and held Cole's for a moment, a long, quiet moment that drew the air taut. He did not scold, he did not question. He simply observed the man who had revealed himself. Through his own words, the truth of character does not need to be exposed. It exposes itself. ASHIR finished wiping the final table and removed her apron carefully, folding it with respect for the place that had offered her a beginning, even if the welcome had been uneven. She bowed her head slightly and prepared to leave. But before she could take a step, the owner asked her to stay just a moment longer. The cook lifted his eyebrows slightly, not in surprise, but in recognition. Something unsaid was moving through the room. Not tension, not confrontation. Something slow, deliberate, and irreversible. Mr. Hale asked ASHIR about her family, if they were adjusting to the city, if the transition had been difficult, if she missed home. His voice was patient, allowing time for thought. ASHIR answered softly, her gaze lowered, but her words were steady. She spoke of distance, of change, of learning, of hope. She did not speak of struggle. Some stories do not need to be told to be heard. Cole rolled his eyes slightly, a small gesture, but loud enough for fate to notice. The owner nodded in quiet understanding, and then, with the simplest motion, he reached into his coat pocket and took out a small velvet pouch, the kind used to carry something irreplaceable. He placed it gently on the counter. Cole's eyes widened with curiosity, expecting jewelry, money, maybe documents. He did not yet know that some truths arrive quietly, but land like thunder. The owner spoke again, voice warm, steady, unhurried, and this time his words changed the air. He said that she was new to the restaurant. Yes, but not new to him. He said she was learning the job. Yes, but not learning him. He said she was adjusting to the environment because the environment needed to adjust to her. Then, in a voice nearly soft enough to be mistaken for tenderness, he spoke the truth that rewrote the room. ASHIR was his daughter-in-law, the one he had welcomed into his family, the one his son loved, the one he had vowed to protect and honor. Silence did not simply fall, it stunned the air into stillness. Cole's confidence shattered, but the consequences had only begun to unfold. The silence that followed was not empty, it was full of questions, full of realizations, full of invisible weight, settling exactly where it needed to. The walls of the restaurant, which had heard countless conversations, arguments, celebrations, heartbreaks, and confessions, now held a new sound, the sound of truth unfolding. Cole stood frozen, his breath faltering, his face first flushed with embarrassment, then anger, then something that resembled fear. Though he tried to hide it beneath a tightening jaw, he had spent the entire day using his authority like a sharpened blade, unaware that the person he cut into was tied to the very foundation of his place in the building. But the truth was deeper than that. This was not simply about hierarchy, title, or relation. It was about character, and character had been speaking loudly long before the revelation was made. ASHIR did not respond with triumph, vindication, or satisfaction. Instead, she lowered her gaze, as if the revelation itself made her feel exposed, seen more deeply than she had expected. She had never intended for her identity to be used as protection. She wanted to earn her place like anyone else, not through blood, not through marriage, not through association. She wanted her efforts to speak, not her name. Mr. Hale, still seated, watched her carefully, not pitying her, not coddling her, simply seeing her, truly seeing her, the way someone trained by life to observe people's hearts before their actions does. The cook, having paused mid-wipe of a metal countertop, exhaled slowly, realizing the day had been leading to a reckoning. He had seen Cole behave this way many times. He had seen good workers leave quietly, choosing dignity over conflict. He had seen apologies, unspoken, and kindnesses withheld. But he had also seen people like ASHIR, people who endured, who softened the world rather than hardened themselves to survive it. He knew, as kitchen people often do, that karma might move slowly, but never aimlessly. Cole tried to speak first, as though he could correct the moment, the same way he corrected ASHIR's pronunciation with force. He opened his mouth to reshape the narrative, to defend himself, to rationalize his behavior as professional necessity. But words, when they come from a place of desperation rather than truth, sit heavy and sour. And in that moment, Mr. Hale's silence was stronger than any rebuttal. The owner finally stood. His movement was slow, deliberate, and steady, the kind of movement made by people who know they do not need volume to be heard. He walked to the counter, placed both hands on its surface, and observed the restaurant in its closing hour state. Empty mugs, cleaned tables, chairs aligned with care, the quiet beauty of routine. Then, he turned his attention back to Cole. There were no speeches, no anger, no dramatic outburst, just a single sentence, spoken plainly. The way a person treats those who are still learning reveals who they truly are. The room absorbed the words. Cole wanted to fight them, argue them, deny them, but the sentence was not an opinion. It was a truth, and truth is difficult to dismantle once it reveals itself so clearly. ASHIR stood still, unsure of whether she had become the cause of conflict, though she had done nothing except work quietly and exist with sincerity. She felt a flicker of guilt, not toward Cole, but toward the harmony she thought she had disrupted, simply by being herself. Immigrant hearts often carry guilt for taking up space, for needing time, for needing patience, even when they have earned every breath. But Mr. Hale turned toward her with a softness that removed that burden entirely. He explained gently how his son had met her, how their families had crossed paths through quiet seasons of life, not grand ones, how she had offered kindness before knowing anything about his family's business or status, how she had never once asked for privilege, how she had insisted on earning every place she stood. He spoke not to elevate her above others, but to honor the truth of who she was. And then, turning back to Cole, his voice shifted, not cold, but firm with the steadiness of a man who does not tolerate injustice disguised as leadership. He spoke of the culture of the restaurant, one built on respect, dignity, humility, and service from the heart. He explained that a manager's role was not to command, but to uplift, not to intimidate, but to educate, not to dominate, but to guide. He said that the true measure of a leader is revealed not when things are easy, but when someone under their care is learning, vulnerable, or uncertain. And today, Cole had shown exactly who he was when given that responsibility. Cole's shoulders tightened. His pride tried to speak again, the kind of pride that cannot bear to be wrong. But the truth was too clear. The witnesses too present. The weight of his behavior too unmistakable. The owner did not fire him in anger. That would have made the lesson shallow, reactive, temporary. Instead, he handed Cole something far heavier than termination. He handed him accountability. He informed him that, beginning the next day, he would no longer be managing the restaurant. He would return to floor staff, to serve, not to supervise, until he learned how to treat others with respect. His title would be restored only if his behavior proved it deserved to be a reversal. Yes, but not punishment. Transformation. The cook did not try to hide the slight lift in his expression, not joy, but relief, the kind that comes when a wrong finally begins to right itself. Cole was silent, not because he agreed, not because he accepted, but because pride, when confronted by truth, often finds itself speechless. The owner turned to Asha and assured her that she had no obligation to continue working if the environment felt unsafe or uncomfortable. But the offer was not made as rescue. It was made as choice, something dignity always requires. Asha, after a moment of silent reflection, placed her hand gently over the folded apron in her grasp. She did not speak, but her gesture answered for her. She would stay not because of protection, not because of title, but because she had come to build, not retreat. The owner nodded once, with the quiet pride of someone who knows strength when he sees it. Closing tasks resumed slowly. The lights dimmed. The windows reflected the warm interior, holding the image of a place where something meaningful had occurred. Not loud, not dramatic, but deep. Outside, the evening breeze brushed against the restaurant sign, making it sway gently, like a curtain shifting at the end of a long scene. Asha stepped out into the night, with her small purse held close, her heart steady, her path just a little clearer than it had been when morning broke. But the day was not finished. Karma does not end when a lesson is spoken. It continues until it is lived. And tomorrow would bring the true test, not for Asha, for Cole. Morning came differently than the day before. Not with eagerness, not with anxiety, but with a quiet anticipation. Like the low hum of a storm, gathering far away, but moving steadily closer. The restaurant windows glowed faintly, catching the pale light of a sun, unsure whether to break through or hide. Inside, the air carried an unfamiliar stillness, the kind that arrives when patterns shift and the usual order of things no longer applies. Cole arrived earlier than usual, not because he had suddenly become more disciplined, but because he needed to reclaim some sense of control. He walked in with a hurried briskness, but his steps lacked the authority they once carried. He no longer walked ahead of the day, bending it to his will. Instead, he moved into the day. Uncertain of what it now demanded of him, the staff noticed the change immediately. The absence of his clipped commands, his hovering corrections, his impatient sighs. His presence was still sharp, but it had lost its center. Power, once removed, does not cling. It leaves fast, like breath from a punched lung. Asha entered a few minutes later, steady and composed, holding the same quiet dignity she had the day before. Not heavier from what had happened, not lighter, either, just steady, like a tree rooted deeply enough that storms pass without shifting its foundation. She tied her apron, adjusted the fabric gently, and began checking place settings. She made no attempt to avoid Cole. She made no attempt to look toward him, either. Dignity does not chase conflict. It simply refuses to bend to it. The cook greeted her with a small nod, the kind that says, "I saw what happened. I understood, and I respect the way you carried yourself." Sometimes, entire conversations can fit into a single nod. The shift began. Regulars trickled in, each one bringing their small rituals. Asha greeted them with her quiet warmth, taking orders with the same patience, the same careful pronunciation, the same attentive listening. Nothing about her changed, because nothing about her had been the problem. But the restaurant felt different. Something invisible had shifted, not in the sound, not in the pace, but in the tone of the day. The staff worked with a subtle ease, now that no one's mistakes were waiting to be turned into spectacle. Conversations were softer, movements were calmer. Even the clinking of dishes seemed less sharp. Meanwhile, Cole stood where new servers usually begin, by the register, waiting for instruction. His jaw was tight, his shoulders stiff. He felt exposed, not by others, but by his own reflection, which he could no longer avoid. Stripped of title, there was no place to hide from the truth of who he had been. His first task was to clear tables. For a man who once measured his worth by how many people he could command, the act felt humbling. Dishes clattered with the awkwardness of someone relearning something he believed he was above doing. His hands, accustomed to pointing and directing, now had two steady plates and balance trays. He worked without rhythm, every gesture revealing how rarely he had used his hands in service rather than supervision. None of the staff smirked or whispered. They had no interest in revenge, no hunger for his humiliation. The quiet around him was honest. It did not mock, it simply allowed, and in that allowing, Cole felt the full weight of seeing himself, not as a manager, not as a leader, but as a man who had forgotten how to be gentle. The first customer of the morning spilled coffee, a simple human accident. Before, Cole would have barked for someone else to handle it. Today, he reached for the towels himself. His movements were stiff, but he did not resist the task. As he wiped the table, slow and uneven, he overheard the woman gently thank him, not as sir, not as manager. Just thank you. A simple acknowledgement of a small kindness. For the first time in a long while, he felt something unfamiliar, the quiet, grounding weight of humility. Asha continued working nearby, refilling tea, answering questions with her steady voice. She did not look toward him. She did not need to. Her presence alone was the lesson. Hours passed. The restaurant filled, emptied, filled again. And in the rhythm of the day, something began to soften in Cole. Not because he was forced to serve, but because service, when done sincerely, has a way of reshaping the heart. As the afternoon slowed, Mr. Hale entered again. Not to inspect, not to interfere, but simply to observe. He watched the room in silence. He saw Asha working with calm confidence, no longer shadowed by scrutiny. He saw the staff moving in quiet coordination, no longer bracing for criticism. He saw Cole clearing tables, not gracefully yet, not naturally, but without resentment. The owner did not smile. He did not applaud. He simply recognized. Growth, even in its smallest beginning, is worth noticing. When the last customers left, and the day drew toward closing, the staff gathered to finish the final tasks. The owner stood near the counter, resting his hands lightly on the edge. He spoke only once, his voice steady and even. He said that titles could return, positions could return, authority could return, But respect was something earned, not demanded, not forced, not claimed. And a leader was not the one who spoke the loudest, corrected the harshest, or stood above others. A leader was the one who built others up, who protected learning, who understood that growth requires patience. He looked at both Asha and Cole, not comparing them, not balancing scales, but acknowledging that the day had changed them both. Asha had proven resilience without bitterness. Cole had begun to learn humility without collapse, and that was enough for now. The restaurant lights dimmed, closing time, settling into the corners. Chairs were stacked, surfaces wiped. The day folded itself quietly into memory. Outside, the street lights flickered on, casting soft halos onto the pavement. Asha stepped into the evening air. Her heart no longer heavy, her steps unburdened, not victorious, not triumphant, simply at peace. Cole exited minutes later, slower, quieter, as though he were not walking away from a workplace, but walking toward the first honest version of himself he had seen in years. Behind them, inside the restaurant, the owner turned off the final light, leaving the room in darkness. The kind of darkness that is not empty, but full of beginnings. And the world continued moving, as it always does. But something had changed, and the change was real.